When I conducted my audience analysis, I asked the class what they believed our country spent on drug enforcement each year. Over half of the class said that they thought that as a country we spend $1 billion or less per year on enforcing drug prohibition. So then it should surprise most of you then to hear that we actually spend a lot closer to $25 billion a year. And you know, $25 billion a year, that's a lot of money. And I was kind of breaking down the numbers. That literally divides down to $50,000 a minute. So every minute, $50,000 is being spent towards trying to prohibit the use of drugs. By the time I'm finished giving this speech, roughly $300,000 is going to be spent trying to stop drug use. My name is Dylan Cohen. And today I will discuss the issues associated with current drug policy in the United States. When I'm finished, I hope to have changed your beliefs concerning the war on drugs, with the intent to encourage the removal of detrimental legislation. First, we will look at the problem, identify the cause, and examine a potential solution. But the first thing we will do is identify the problem. So the biggest problem with the war on drugs is the tremendous expense it warrants. According to drugwarfacts.org, the United States is on track to spend over $25 billion for the third year in a row. Last year it was $25.2 billion, this year it is $25.6 billion. And we are currently on course to break $26 billion for 2014. The same report also went on to estimate that if the war on drugs were to end today, the country would save $41.3 billion alone just on enforcement expenses. So that's literally the cost of just providing the manpower and the presence of the government to prohibit the use of drugs, $41.3 billion. So that's a lot. Furthermore, banning drug use keeps the United States from profiting off of consumption and fosters black market trade. And according to whitehouse.gov, in 2006, it was estimated that over $100 billion was spent on the consumption of meth, heroin, cocaine, and marijuana. The same report also estimated that drug legalization would yield tax revenue of $46.7 billion annually, assuming that these drugs were to be regulated like tobacco and alcohol. So I think it was like $41.7 billion to save just on the enforcement expenses. Now this is coming just tax revenue. So that's already almost $100 billion right there that our country could be utilizing. And considering this tremendous deficit we have, I mean, any money is going to be helpful. So now that we've discussed the problem, we can move on to the cause. The cause of this problem, I've kind of broken it down into two aspects, but it's basically, it's based off the fact that the decision to prohibit drugs was made in a much different time than ours. So Richard Nixon was president in 1970. He was a big part of the effort to pass the Controlled Substance Act. And that act itself didn't make all drugs illegal. It just sort of created one central statute that created the schedules of drugs and basically sort of made a legislation that said this drug is worse than that one and that one's worse than this one and they're all dangerous. And it was basically all of these legislations were coming out of a period where there was little knowledge of what all of these drugs of how they affect your body and your health. And so as you can imagine, the CSA it did not achieve its goal in curbing drug use completely. Drug use has always remained rampant since it was proposed in the 70s. All it did really was just inflate our prison population. The second aspect of this cause is that as American citizens, we are subjected to abide by this outdated legislation, even though it doesn't reflect current societal values. So obviously, you guys can tell that societal opinions regarding drugs are way more tolerant than they were 40 years ago. Much of that is just based on the fact that we know a lot more now. But for example, concerning marijuana, according to a Pew Research poll, over 50% of the United States favors legalizing pot. And as you guys all know, Colorado and Washington have already legalized it. So that's two states right there that have come up with a form of legislation that openly defies the CSA. So on top of that, there's even been public acknowledgement of the failure of the war on drugs from New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson and even President Obama, who has gone on record to say that he does not believe it has been effective and that he believes it is more of a public health issue as opposed to a social concern. So now that we understand the problem and causes behind it, let's explore the most natural solution. The The solution to the problems caused by the war on drugs will only disappear if the CSA itself is repealed. More specifically, drug use needs to be treated as a health issue rather than a criminal one. Realistically, that's not a very realistic goal or practical, just because it just involves a lot of influencing in politics and society, and those are really slow processes as it is. However, we can examine the effects that decriminalization may have on our country by examining another country's policies. Portugal. In 2001, Portugal became the first European country to decriminalize all drugs. And they basically started a program where anyone who got in trouble for minor possession, they would be sent to a panel consisting of a legal advisor, psychologist, and social worker. And basically, they changed their whole standpoint from, this is not an act that we need to punish by putting you in a jail. This is a health concern that we need to get professionals, readily available to you so that we can figure out why you are using drugs and what is the best form of your treatment. And contrary to popular belief, decriminalizing all drugs in Portugal did not make drug use go up. According to a Time magazine research study, in the years after 2001, when Portugal decriminalized drugs, drug use among teens dropped, and rates of new HIV infections dropped due to dirty needles and after considering Portugal's policy, we could incorporate some aspects of their system into a potential solution for ours. Any instance of minor possession should not warrant a criminal offense. It should be treated as a health concern. The DEA and other agencies that enforce drug policy should be eliminated and replaced with agencies tasked with the regulation and distribution of various drugs. And just like alcohol, there should be a universal age that should be established that signifies that you're responsible and aware enough to safely consume drugs. There are a few things you guys can do to help the effort as it is. You can contact your local representative, you can vote against harsher drug use penalties or increased funding for drug enforcement, and you can also visit leap.cc and click on Take Action to find out more ways to help. So to conclude, today we looked at the problems that the prohibition of drugs has caused for our country. We identified the cause that plagued this issue, and we explored a potential solution through observing another country's policy. So as I said before, right now, $300,000 gone. Government just spent it trying to stop drug use, and I would make a very strong case to say that drug use is just as rampant as it was 6 minutes ago when I started this speech. And after Natalia talks, that number is going to be in the millions. So one thing that everyone here kind of has to ask themselves is, to some extent, are the costs of prohibition really worth it? Thank you.